The California sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Lieutenant Emma Torres adjusted her combat vest one final time. 2,000 service members filled the exhibition grounds, their conversations creating a low hum of anticipation. Emma had faced hostile forces in 3 different countries, earned her Ranger tab when only a handful of women had achieved it, and trained in disciplines most soldiers never even heard of. Yet standing here, knowing what this demonstration represented, her pulse quickened with something deeper than nervousness. This was about every woman who had ever been told she did not belong in combat. Every female soldier who had proven herself a dozen times over, only to face doubt again the next morning. It was about changing the very culture of the military, one mind at a time. The weight of that mission felt heavier than any gear she had ever carried. Brigadier General Patricia Hammond approached, her stride purposeful despite the oppressive heat. The general had personally requested Emma for this demonstration, though Emma still wasn't entirely sure why. At 53, Hammond was a living legend, a trailblazer who had broken through barriers most people couldn't even imagine existed. Her presence alone carried weight. She was the kind of leader who inspired both fear and fierce loyalty, often at the same time. "They are ready for you, Lieutenant," Hammond said quietly, her voice a low rumble that commanded attention. "Remember, this isn't just about technique. It's about changing minds." Emma nodded, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. She spotted familiar faces from her unit, soldiers she had trained alongside, bled with, trusted with her life. They knew what she could do. But the 1,000 other faces? They were about to find out. The demonstration was straightforward on paper. Emma would showcase advanced hand-to-hand combat techniques, specifically designed for situations when weapons failed or were unavailable. Real-world scenarios where skill, leverage, and strategy mattered far more than raw size or brute strength. She had prepared for weeks with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, her usual training partner. They had choreographed each movement to maximize educational value while maintaining absolute safety. It was a dance of controlled violence, precise and predictable. But plans, as they often do in the military, were about to change. Then she saw him, walking toward the center of the training ground, as if he owned it. Commander Blake Sullivan cut an imposing figure even among this gathering of elite military personnel. 6 feet 2 inches of solid muscle, and unshakable confidence. His uniform displaying a chest full of ribbons that told stories of classified operations and impossible odds overcome. 15 years as a Navy SEAL, more successful missions than most operators even dreamed of. He had a reputation as one of the finest, most lethal warriors in the entire armed forces. He was also, according to the whispered conversations Emma had overheard in the mess hall and the training barracks, someone who firmly believed that women had no place in direct combat roles. His opinions weren't just idle talk, they carried influence. "Lieutenant Torres," Sullivan called out, his voice carrying effortlessly across the grounds, silencing the low hum of the crowd. "I volunteered to assist in your demonstration today." A cold knot tightened in Emma's stomach. This was not the plan. Rodriguez was supposed to be your partner. Rodriguez, who understood the choreography, the safety protocols, the very purpose behind each technique. This last-minute substitution felt like a setup. She glanced toward General Hammond, searching for some sign, some explanation. The general's expression revealed nothing except a slight, almost imperceptible narrowing of the eyes. Was this a test? Or had Hammond been blindsided too? There was no way to know. Emma was on her own. "Thank you, Commander," Emma replied, forcing her voice to remain professional and steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "I appreciate your willingness to participate," Sullivan smiled, but there was something sharp and predatory beneath it. "Happy to help," he said as he closed the distance between them. Then, lowering his voice so that only she could hear, he added, "Just follow my lead, and we'll get through this without any embarrassment." The words hit her like a physical slap, not because they were overtly hostile, but because of the condescending implication that she needed his protection, that her success depended on his generosity, that she was, fundamentally, out of her depth, and he was there to save her from herself. 2,000 soldiers now formed a wide, silent circle around them. In the front row, Emma recognized Colonel Jennifer Walsh, the first female combat pilot to fly in active operations, standing with several other high-ranking officers, both male and female. The weight of their expectations, of their collective hope and skepticism, pressed down on her shoulders. This was no longer a simple demonstration. It was a trial. "Today's demonstration," Emma announced, projecting her voice with a clarity and force that surprised even herself, "focuses on neutralizing an attacker when you are at a physical disadvantage. In combat, size and strength are not the only factors that determine survival. Technique, leverage, and the will to win are the great equalizers." She held Sullivan's gaze as she spoke, letting him know that the last part was meant for him. Sullivan began circling her slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. His movements were fluid, confident, a display of the casual lethality he was known for. Emma didn't move. She simply tracked his movements, her training kicking in automatically, pushing aside the anger and the anxiety. She had studied countless fighting styles, from traditional martial arts to modern military combatives to the brutal, effective street fighting techniques learned from grizzled operators who had survived situations where the rulebook simply didn't apply. "Ready when you are, Lieutenant," Sullivan said, his voice loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. Then, barely a whisper, a venomous aside just for her. "Don't make me look bad, sweetheart." The patronizing term, sweetheart, was the spark that lit the fuse. It ignited a cold, controlled fire in Emma's chest. But she kept her face a neutral mask. This was bigger than her ego. This was about proving that capability has nothing to do with gender. It was about every woman who had been called a pet name in a professional setting, meant to diminish and dismiss. Sullivan lunged forward. It started as what appeared to be a standard training attack, the kind used in demonstrations worldwide. But Emma, with her years of experience, saw the subtle differences immediately. He had added variations, small, unpredictable changes in speed and angle. They were designed not to hurt her, but to make her look clumsy, unprepared. He was actively trying to embarrass her, to sabotage the demonstration and prove his chauvinistic point in front of 2,000 witnesses. Time seemed to slow down. The noise of the crowd faded to a distant hum. Emma's body responded on pure instinct, a culmination of 8 years of intensive, relentless training guiding every single movement. She didn't think. She reacted. She recognized the opening he'd given her, the slight overextension in his eagerness to control her, to dominate the demonstration. His weight distribution was off by mere inches, a fatal flaw to a trained eye. But those inches created a vulnerability, a window of opportunity. One precise, decisive counter was all it would take. As Sullivan's hand reached toward her shoulder, aiming to grab and control her, Emma made a choice that would change everything. This was no longer about a rehearsed demonstration. This wasn't just about self-defense or following protocols. This was about respect. It was about proving in the most undeniable way possible that underestimation is the most dangerous mistake one can make on the battlefield. It was about showing every single person watching that deeply held assumptions could be shattered in a single breathtaking moment. The 1,000 faces in the crowd blurred into a single indistinct background. The oppressive California sun disappeared from her awareness. Sullivan's confident, condescending expression filled her entire vision. And Emma Torres, lieutenant in the United States Army, ranger and warrior, decided that some lessons were well worth the consequences. She was done being underestimated. He wanted a demonstration? She was about to give him one he would never forget. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content just like this. We'll see you in the next one. Emma's body moved with fluid precision, redirecting Sullivan's momentum with a technique that turned his own strength against him. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as she executed a counter that wasn't in any standard military manual. She learned it from a former Israeli Defense Forces instructor during a joint training exercise in Tel Aviv. It was a move designed for survival. Sullivan stumbled, catching himself quickly. The surprise on his face vanished, replaced by something much darker. Anger. His jaw tightened. His posture shifted. This demonstration was about to become something else entirely. Let's show them something more realistic. Sullivan's voice cut through the air, carrying to the front rows. He didn't wait for her to answer. He attacked again, this time with a brutal, unmistakable force. He was no longer following the script. He was engaging her as a real opponent, using techniques reserved for the battlefield. Emma blocked a strike that would have seriously injured a less experienced soldier. The impact shot up her forearm, making her teeth clench. Around the circle, she saw officers shifting uncomfortably. Colonel Walsh took a step forward, her face etched with concern. But General Hammond raised a subtle hand, her expression unreadable. The message was clear. Let this play out. Emma's mind raced, even as her body reacted on instinct. She could call a stop to it, appeal to the officers watching, and make it clear that Sullivan had broken the rules. But that would just feed every single stereotype she'd fought against. The idea that women needed protection, that they couldn't handle the raw reality of combat. Sullivan pressed his advantage, forcing her backward with a relentless series of aggressive moves. Sweat beaded on her forehead, not from exertion, but from the intense concentration it took to defend herself without seriously injuring him. "You're out of your depth, Lieutenant," Sullivan growled, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "This is what real combat looks like. Maybe stick to what you know." Those words ignited something inside Emma. She had heard variations of that same message her entire career. During Ranger training, when the instructors just waited for her to quit. In Afghanistan, when a team leader tried to bench her for administrative duties, despite her qualifications. At a Pentagon briefing just 6 weeks ago, when her tactical analysis was dismissed, only for events to prove her right 48 hours later. She was tired of it. Tired of having to prove herself, over and over again. Tired of being exceptional, just to be considered adequate. Tired of men like Sullivan, who saw her uniform and her achievements, but still only saw her gender. Sullivan launched another attack, a takedown attempt designed to get her on the ground, where his superior weight would give him an overwhelming advantage. In a normal demonstration, Emma would have let it happen and shown the crowd how to escape from that position. But this had stopped being normal the moment Sullivan decided to make it personal. Emma sidestepped with inches to spare, her boots finding purchase on the packed earth. She created just enough distance to use a counter she hadn't learned in the military. This was from her years studying Krav Maga under a master in Philadelphia, a technique designed for one purpose: to stop a larger, stronger attacker who refuses to stop. Sullivan's aggression morphed into confusion as he suddenly found himself completely off balance. His own weight, his momentum, his strength, all the advantages he thought he had, were now working against him. Emma saw the opening, that split second of vulnerability when even the most seasoned fighter is unable to recover. She struck with controlled precision, targeting a pressure point that few people outside of specialized combative circles even knew existed. A move required exact placement and exact force. Too little, and it would do nothing. Too much, and it could cause lasting damage. Emma had practiced this thousands of times. She knew exactly what she was doing. Sullivan's eyes went wide with shock. His body stiffened, every single muscle locking up at once. Then, in front of 2,000 assembled soldiers, including some of the most decorated military leaders in the country, Commander Blake Sullivan, a living Navy SEAL legend, collapsed unconscious onto the training ground. The silence that followed was absolute. It felt like even the wind had stopped. 2,000 people held their breath, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Emma immediately dropped to one knee beside Sullivan, her training kicking in. She checked his pulse steady and strong. His breathing was regular. He wasn't injured, just unconscious, exactly as she had intended. Medical personnel were already rushing forward, their boots pounding against the hard earth. Captain Torres. General Hammond's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. My office, now. Emma rose to her feet, her body still humming with adrenaline. As she walked toward the general, she heard fragments of conversation ripple through the crowd. Did you see that? She just dropped Sullivan. A SEAL. How is that even possible? That was not part of the demonstration. Is he okay? Someone said she killed him. No, look, he's breathing. She knew exactly what she was doing. Colonel Walsh fell into step beside her, her voice low and urgent. Do you realize what you've just done, Lieutenant? Emma kept her eyes locked forward, her expression a mask of neutrality, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Yes, ma'am. I defended myself against an attack that violated demonstration protocols. You knocked out one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in the armed forces in front of half the base command structure, Walsh said. This is going to escalate, Torres. Fast. Emma knew she was right. In defending herself, in refusing to be humiliated, she had just created an incident that would ripple far beyond this base. Her career, everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, might end today in General Hammond's office. But as she walked away from the training ground, leaving behind the unconscious Sullivan and the stunned crowd, Emma felt something unexpected. She felt no regret whatsoever. General Hammond's office was smaller than Emma had expected, the walls lined with photographs documenting 3 decades of military service. The general closed the door, muffling the chaos outside where medical teams attended to Sullivan, and officers tried to process what they had just witnessed. Emma stood at attention, her posture perfect despite every muscle in her body screaming from the adrenaline crash. At ease, Lieutenant, Hammond said, moving behind her desk. She didn't sit, instead standing with her arms crossed, studying Emma with an expression that revealed nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken consequences. Emma waited, knowing that whatever came next would define not just her career, but potentially the future of women in combat roles across all branches of service. That was quite a demonstration, Lieutenant Torres, Hammond finally said, her voice cutting through the tension. Ma'am, I take full responsibility for my actions, Emma replied, her voice steady. Commander Sullivan violated demonstration protocols and escalated the engagement beyond acceptable parameters. I responded with appropriate force to neutralize the threat. Appropriate force, Hammond repeated, a hint of something that might have been amusement touching her eyes. You rendered unconscious a Navy SEAL commander in front of 2,000 witnesses, using a technique not found in any standard military training manual. Yes, ma'am. Do you know why I specifically requested you for this demonstration, Lieutenant Torres? Emma hesitated. No, ma'am. Hammond moved to the window overlooking the training grounds where crowds still gathered, watching as medical personnel finally helped a dazed Sullivan to his feet. Because I knew something like this might happen, the general said, her back to Emma. Not this exactly, but something that would force a conversation this military has been avoiding for too long. A knock interrupted them. A junior officer entered with a tablet displaying security footage from multiple angles. General, you asked for this immediately. Hammond took the tablet, her eyes scanning the video. Emma watched as the general's expression shifted from neutral to something harder, more determined. After several minutes, Hammond set the tablet down and looked directly at Emma. This footage shows Commander Sullivan clearly escalating beyond demonstration parameters. It shows him using combat-level force against you. It shows you exercising remarkable restraint until you had no choice but to defend yourself. Hammond paused, letting her words sink in. It also shows exactly what I hoped it would. That skill, training, and intelligence matter more than physical size when applied correctly. Emma felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she hadn't realized was there, though she kept her expression neutral. "You are not being reprimanded, Lieutenant," Hammond continued, her tone firm. "In fact, I am recommending you for a commendation for demonstrating advanced combat effectiveness under pressure. But more importantly, I am assigning you to develop a new training curriculum based on what happened today." Emma was stunned. "Ma'am?" "The military is changing, Torres. Women are serving in combat roles across every branch. But our training has not fully adapted to recognize that different does not mean inferior. Your techniques, your approach, these need to become standard instruction." 3 hours later, Emma sat in the base medical center as Commander Sullivan regained consciousness. She had debated whether to come, but something pulled her here. Maybe it was professional courtesy. Maybe it was curiosity about how he would react now that his pride had taken such a public blow. Sullivan's eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to recognition, and then, surprisingly, embarrassment. He tried to sit up too quickly and winced, one hand going to his head. "Easy, Commander," Emma said quietly from the chair beside his bed. "You took a hard fall." Sullivan's eyes found hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said, his voice raspy, "That was some technique, Lieutenant. Where did you learn that?" "Private instruction. Years of study outside standard military training." Another silence, this one less hostile. Sullivan looked at his hands, then back at her. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant Torres. What I did out there was unprofessional and dangerous. I let my ego override my judgment." Emma studied him, searching for insincerity, but finding only genuine regret. "Apology accepted, Commander. The General told me she wants us to work together," Sullivan continued. "Developing a new combat curriculum that incorporates your techniques. She thinks what you know should be taught to everyone, regardless of gender." Emma raised an eyebrow. "How do you feel about that?" Sullivan was quiet for a moment, then a rueful smile touched his lips. "I feel like I learned more in 5 minutes on that training ground than I have in the last 5 years. You are right, Lieutenant. Size and strength are not everything. I forgot that, got comfortable relying on physical advantages instead of continuing to grow as a fighter." Over the following weeks, Emma and Sullivan worked together in a way neither had anticipated. It was an alliance forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. The Navy SEAL brought 15 years of hard-won combat experience and unmatched tactical knowledge. Emma contributed techniques from a dozen different martial arts disciplines and a perspective that challenged conventional military wisdom at its core. Their partnership was awkward at first, marked by Sullivan's lingering embarrassment and Emma's cautious trust. He was used to being the authority in the room, the one with all the answers. She was used to having to fight for every ounce of respect. But gradually, something shifted. They discovered a shared passion for problem solving, for finding the most effective solution rather than the most traditional one. They argued, they debated, they challenged each other. Sullivan proved willing to admit when Emma's approach worked better than his. He'd try a technique, fail, and then listen as she broke down the physics of leverage and momentum. In return, Emma learned from Sullivan's extensive real-world combat experience in ways no classroom could teach. He could tell her exactly how a theory would play out in the chaos of a firefight or the tight confines of a captured building. Meanwhile, the incident had sparked intense debate throughout the military. Some called Emma's actions insubordinate, a dangerous precedent that undermined the chain of command. They argued she had humiliated a superior officer. But many others, including a growing number of high-ranking officials, saw it as a necessary wake-up call. It was undeniable proof that outdated assumptions about gender and combat effectiveness needed to be challenged, and fast. 6 months later, Emma stood on a review stand, watching the first-class graduate from the Advanced Combat Effectiveness program she and Sullivan had created together. 50 soldiers, men and women from different branches, had completed the grueling training. It was a curriculum that emphasized adaptability over brute force, technique over size, intelligence over assumption. Sullivan stood beside her, his posture relaxed in a way it had not been when they first met. He was no longer just a powerhouse. He was a more complete warrior, one who appreciated that true strength came in many forms. "They're calling it the Torres doctrine in some circles," he said quietly, a note of pride in his voice. Adapting to overcome regardless of physical disadvantage. Emma watched the graduates receiving their certificates, each one now equipped with skills that could save their lives and the lives of their teammates on some future, unknown battlefield. "It was never about proving anything," she replied. "It was about survival, about making sure everyone comes home." "I know that now," Sullivan said. I'm sorry it took getting knocked out in front of 2,000 people for me to understand it." Emma glanced at him, saw the genuine respect in his eyes, and allowed herself a small smile. "Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most valuable ones, Commander." That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Emma received new orders from General Hammond. A specialized assignment leading a joint operations team into one of the most volatile regions in the Middle East. It was high risk, high importance, the kind of mission that could make or break a career. She read the team roster. Listed as second in command was Commander Blake Sullivan. Emma read the orders twice, then looked out at the training grounds where it had all begun 6 months ago. She thought about all the women who had come before her, breaking barriers and changing minds in a world that was slow to adapt. She thought about the soldiers who would benefit from the training she and Sullivan had created. She thought about how one moment of standing up for herself had rippled outward in ways she never could have predicted. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sullivan. "Ready for the real test, Lieutenant?" Emma smiled and typed back. "Always ready, Commander. Let's show them what real teamwork looks like," because that was the truth she had learned through all of this. Strength was not about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about knowing your worth, refusing to accept limitations others tried to impose, and having the courage to stand up, even when the cost might be everything you had worked for. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing up changed not just your own path, but opened doors for everyone who came after. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more.